Hi there, I'm Jim.
I'm John.
Let's talk teaching. Welcome to Let's Talk Teaching, a podcast from the Center for Teaching, Learning, and Technology here at Illinois State University. I'm Jim G. Joining me today is Dr. John Baldwin. He's a professor in the School of Communication here at Illinois State. He is also the 2016 Outstanding University Teaching Award winner for tenure track faculty here on campus. John, welcome to the show.
It's nice to be here.
It is great to have you here. In the interest of full disclosure, let me just put it this way. When we talk about your teaching, I can speak about your teaching today from experience because I had the honor of being in several of your classes, and you had the honor of correcting all of my spelling and grammar in my master's thesis. So,
hopefully I put some funny comments in your margins.
You did a really great job. I mean, it was a great experience. And we're not talking about theses today and doing that, although that would be a great episode to do at some point. What I would like to talk to you about is you are very involved in, study abroad, and also, of course, you're teaching intercultural communication. And we live in interesting times as far as culture and communication goes, but you also have some exciting projects coming up. So I'd love to talk about that with you today. So to start, I'd like to ask you about the teaching award process, and specifically about the creation of your teaching portfolio. What was that experience like, and what did you learn?
I learned a lot from putting together the portfolio. There's a whole bunch of different documents that you have to assemble. You have to think about a teaching situation that you've had and how you would respond to that, what you've learned from it. You have to have a philosophy of teaching, which made me think about what really drives my teaching.
Uh-huh.
You have to summarize the evaluations, the quantitative and the qualitative scores. So there are many different parts to this evaluation. You have to choose artifacts that go in. So I might have letters where people have commented on my teaching or exercises, and I have to choose the very best to put into the portfolio. It's painstaking, and actually one thing I learned is sometimes you're nominated more than once before you actually get an award.
Well, there you go. Well, and learning is often an iterative process, isn't it? So,
right.
So there you go.
And I'm very honored to get the award because there are many, many excellent teachers here at ISU, and one of the reasons I like ISU is because while we do value good research, we especially value good teaching. And I tell students, if you want to study teaching, if you want good teachers, ISU is the place to be.
You teach in the areas of intercultural communication. I mean, you do a little bit of everything, right? And also qualitative research and whatnot. So you've done a lot of traveling over the years, and you've always been able to tie that into your teaching. Tell us a little bit about some of your adventures outside of campus and how you've tied that into your teaching over the years.
Sure. And this relates to my portfolio because one of the things I talked about in my portfolio was mentoring, and we might come back to that. And one of them is really internationalization. And in the School of Communication, we actually have two different committees. One is on international experiences, and one is greater awareness of domestic diversity issues, such as women's issues in the classroom, transgendered students' issues, issues for people of color. And really, I believe that these two are related to some overarching global learning goals about learning the place of American culture in the world, learning our role in that world as citizens. And I even tell my students sometimes up front, I'm not here to give you job skills. I'm here to make you better citizens and communication partners and spouses or romantic partners. So with that in mind, I focus a lot on internationalization in different contexts. One of those is bringing international ideas to the classroom. So in most of my classes, we study culture. We'll have guest speakers on different languages and the structure of those languages in one course. In another course, we look at different cultural perspectives of communication and aging. And several of my courses are all about culture and communication, both being aware of our own identity and our cultural identities here within the United States and also traveling abroad. The other thing that this has led me to is I've been trying for a few years to get a cross-cultural program, getting our communication students into Latin America. And we finally have success with a trip to Panama coming up in June of 2017. And we just found out that we have enough students to make this trip.
Great.
Yeah, we have a good number of students coming on the trip with us. And the way we're building this program actually is to have our students into the classroom with Panamanians. So the idea is to have as many Panamanians in the class as there are Americans. and we'll basically spend the month in class with the Panamanians. We'll have excursions around town, movie nights, because I'm teaching identity in the media.
Oh, great.
So we'll get together at night and eat popcorn and watch Latin American films with subtitles, and with the Latin Americans to really see the world from their perspective.
That's great. And
really the whole point of this is to really get our students, even though we're going together as a group of Americans, to try to get them outside of the American mindset to see the world from a different view.
Mm-hmm. And that idea, the opportunity to finally be able to do this and provide that immersion for students is great. What tips might you have, or what have you learned about trying to expose that to students who can't leave the classroom? In other words, bringing that idea into the classroom. Are there little things you can do?
Yeah, there are, and that really touches on something I was thinking about, and that is the notion of internationalization. Very often we think refers to us taking students to another country, but really internationalization is a way of seeing the world, as seeing ourselves as citizens of something bigger than simply the United States or normal. So some of that deals with bringing speakers on campus. So they have the global seminar series where we can hear speakers about or from different cultures. Sometimes we bring it in different ways by having speakers come to our classroom. So one year I had someone from Azerbaijan who was over in psychology, and he came and he spoke to my class about his culture. I can't say that.
Yeah.
Azerbaijan culture.
Yeah.
So I try to have students, I try to have speakers come from different cultures to my classes. Certainly not every class is useful for this. For example, if you're studying something like mathematics, well, mathematics are much the same all around the world.
Right.
So that's part of it, is just bringing concepts to the classroom, but then also part of it is helping students see that they have culture from even wherever they're from, and that there might be differences between Chicagoland area and rural farm culture in Illinois.
Right.
And each one of us is made up of complex identities.
Yeah.
And so I have one whole class that most of the assignments are focused on making the students aware of what they bring to the table in terms of their own identities.
And do you find, because we're all kind of working through that, not just because of the times in which we find ourselves now, where it's obvious we are in some ways a much more polarized country than we thought. And we've done some episodes and we've had some discussions, and certainly we have done programming on campus about talking about these issues in your class and whatever the appropriate context, for your discipline. You must have experienced over the years, because you teach both graduate and undergraduate level intercultural communication still, right?
Yes.
You must have experienced a lot of shock on the part of some students when they have that realization that the world isn't exactly what they thought it was. How do you deal with that? What have you seen, I guess I should ask first, and how do you help students kind of along that road?
Yeah, because I teach upper level students mostly, I don't experience that as much, or at least I don't see it. Maybe the students are used to masking their shock when they talk about new cultures. I do think in today's mediated society that it would be hard to show up on the doorstep of college without having some exposure to other cultures,
right? Because
of the internet. So I think students are ready. They see things on TV. Some students are resistant to analyzing, especially their own privilege. So when we talk about white privilege in the classroom, that's a little harder discussion. Sure. And often there are other students who have thought through it. So we do a lot with discussion in the classes because the students will learn from other student experiences much easier than they will from me telling them about it. So we try to have a lot of class discussions, and especially in these classes, we usually set ground rules for discussion and say, here's some rules for how to talk about difficult topics. A lot of it, I think, is me trying to model the notion of openness and sometimes being vulnerable. So one of the things I talked about in my portfolio was the semester was coming along and we were having an election, and I was making little jabs at one of the candidates, just little sideways sarcastic things, not even mentioning the name, but everyone knew who I was talking about. And one of my students, who was quite a different stance and much in the minority, said, well, you're promoting openness and dialogue, but you keep making these jabs at this candidate. How do you expect us to be open if you keep making these jokes? And I came back to the next class and I said, you're right. And I made an apology. And from then on, I tried to say, okay, we can talk about issues. Let's not talk about personalities. And let's not make any claims without evidence. But all claims should be able to be made in the classroom. So from there, we tried to have some discussions. At some points, my one student would make a comment and people would roll their eyes.
Sure.
And then we would call them on it.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe not directly, but I'd come back and I'd say, listen, open dialogue means not rolling your eyes when someone says something you disagree with.
And that's one of the hardest things you can learn to do. But you're right. You're absolutely right.
So now I'm in a class, and it's a smaller class. It's 27 people, but it's fairly open. So we're doing this. Everyone stands up in the classroom and says, I am, and then they fill in a group or something that they identify with. I am a Cubs fan. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Now, open.
So someone says, I am a sister, and I am. Yeah. So we get towards the back of the class, and we find out one of our students stands up and he says, I am queer. And the one right behind him says, well, I am gay. So then we talk about the differences between queer and gay, but the idea that these students would be so open in the classroom and just discuss these things as part of our ongoing conversation says that something hopefully good has happened by this time for people to be open.
Yeah. You keyed in on something important about setting ground rules. Do you address that in your syllabus, or is it just a discussion you have at the beginning of the semester, or?
I do this more. I have 2 intercultural classes at the undergraduate level, and one of them is the more experiential. We do more games and more exercises. Our exams, our essays are about your identity, your own personal experiences, observing or being the target of prejudice. And that's the one where I actually pass out a set of ground rules that we talk about. And I have a list of ground rules. And I've seen some other stuff. We'll even talk about these. I saw these at Bone Student Center one time. We were talking, and they was sitting on a paper
Post-it note thing or something.
Yeah.
An easel or something like that.
Exactly. So one of the notes says, when we're having these discussions, come expecting to be changed.
Yeah.
Come as you are, but don't leave as you were.
Yeah.
Pause to listen to understand where the person is coming from.
Yeah.
So what I do now, and the upper level class is more about theory and research, so I don't give them the ground rules, but we're still modeling it all the time, where someone says something and I don't show shock or surprise, and I listen and I validate the point, no matter what the point is. That doesn't mean we have to agree with everything, but we talk about the ability to disagree.
Yeah.
If someone says something, so it's not largely discussion. We're not discussing issues as much as the research. But then, because we just came from a unit on whiteness, so I'm reading James Baldwin's essay, Stranger in the Village.
Okay.
And I'm just going to say, we're going to have a dramatic reading here.
Oh.
And I do a dramatic reading of James Baldwin's Stranger in the Village, which is about being a black man in America in the 1950s. And I said, you can agree with him or not agree with him. That's not the point. The point is, can you read into his life? Part of being a communicator is stepping into the shoes of the other person to see the world from that person's view. And I'm not asking you to agree with it, but I'm asking you to understand it.
See, I think, and that's, as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking about in my own teaching and with the faculty members with whom I work here at CTLT, when we talk about things like this, I think you've hit on something, and that's when you're building this community in your classroom, what is the thing that, how do I put this? It's the judgmental. It's that judgmental full stop at the end of the thought. That's what we want to avoid.
Yes.
Yeah. That's the thing that, and I've never been able to quite frame it like that until I heard you talking about that. It's that you don't have to agree, but we listen to everyone but you don't go that extra step, which seems so natural to us,
right,
as human beings or Americans or whatever it is. It seems so natural nowadays that we have to put that judgment on there.
I think that something else that I've really learned from my wife, who teaches multicultural counseling in a much more homogenous audience than I do.
Okay.
And she says that we're going to talk about some issues, and I am not here to resolve the issues.
Yeah.
I'm not here to resolve the discussion. I'm not here to make you less angry. And sometimes we feel that if there's people upset in the classroom or there's a tense discussion, that we must solve it for them. And my wife says, no, what we need to do is we need to be able to sit with them in their hurt.
Yeah.
And
that's great.
We can say up front, we're not going to resolve the issues. We're not here to find all the answers. We're here to ask questions and for you to continue thinking about it.
Which is, again, is somewhat counter to our nature, because we like to, we think in terms of stories. You and I have talked about that a lot, and I've written about that, but we think in terms of stories, and we like to have an ending.
Yes.
It doesn't have to be a happy ending all the time, but we like closure. We want to put issues to bed. And sometimes you can't do that, at least not in the course of a class or a semester long course.
So this actually also relates not only to issues of diversity and these very difficult discussions, but it also deals with teaching. So again, I'm teaching intercultural communication at 3 different levels. So sometimes it might be the same ideas, the same theory, but we deal with it differently each time. At the lowest level, I say, these are some of the concepts, let's apply them.
Yeah.
At the second level, I say, these are some concepts, let's talk about the problems with these concepts, and let's see where they break down.
Mm-hmm.
And then the third level, the graduate level, the students are reading research and coming in. We're going to discuss a theory, and everyone has read different articles, and the students actually choose the articles they're going to read, so they have a lot of choice. And I try to build a lot of choice, especially the higher we go, the more choice there is, even in terms of which questions you answer in the test. What form is the test going to take? What are we going to read for class? So the students choose the reading, and then they come back, and the readings actually challenge the theory. So we're reading the theory, and I say, okay, well, some of what you found disagrees with the theory that the article's about. And then we get to talk about that, and I promise them, typically in the upper level classes, I promise not to give you a definition of culture. And instead, we're going to challenge every definition there is and see what its strengths and limitations are.
Yeah, and I still get that. And I remember teaching Com 110, the introductory speech course, and there's a little bit in that about culture, that was hard for me not to try to define culture for them, but that was one of the great pieces of advice I got. Yeah. Let them figure it out. So, and that's true with a lot of the learning that they go through, I think.
And that might depend on the level of teaching. Like if I'm teaching a lower level audience and it's not a class about culture, like we have a very basic introduction to communication theory class, and when I'm guest lecturing in that class, then I tend to say, here is a definition of culture that will work for today. But I'm not here to deconstruct this. I'm here to introduce the concept. So I always have to judge how much I analyze in terms of the needs for the class and what my goals for the class are. For the upper level classes, I'm moving more towards their ability to understand and explore and do research. It's a theory and research course. And really, except that I want to evaluate the students in some way, I'm almost thinking, like in my graduate classes, I stopped having exams. In my upper level undergraduate classes, we move more and more to essays. And I tell them up front, I see it's going to be an in-class essay exam. Here are your questions. Go get ready. Yeah,
go get ready. Well, because it's the preparation. That's how they learn, is through the preparation. Going back to what you were talking about whether or not to define culture, I think that someone who's listening to this who doesn't teach in the discipline of communication, but is still really striving to overcome that hurdle of having a group of people in class and actually building a real community of learners. It may make more sense to say, well, here's one definition of culture, because we need to talk about our own identities, because that's the important part. So that facilitates. So even if you're teaching a math class, or you're teaching some other, you're teaching in one of the sciences, or you're teaching a health sciences class or criminal justice or something like that, I think that there are things that faculty could do. There is a discussion to be had early in the semester about who are we, and we want to be respectful of each other's ideas. And so I think actually, I've been going back and forth, but I think actually you're right, putting that at least a definition of culture out there. Now, which definition you choose, I guess, depends on
your audience.
Depends on your audience, right?
Yeah. But you're talking about developing a community of learners. So really one of my underlying goals, and I try to model this also for my students, is I want them to be lifelong learners. We're in the age of the internet. Yeah. We're in the age where the students are going to sell back their textbooks if they even buy them.
Right.
So what I want is, and I'm talking about intercultural communication out front. I'm going to say, you are not going to be an expert in any culture after this class. That's not our goal. Our goal is to give you the skills, the types of questions to ask, so that you get assigned to Mexico, or you have a worker in your department who's from India. You can know what to do to explore and to understand what that might mean for if it's even relevant to who that person is and how that person sees him or herself. So I'm also here to try to get the students to love learning. So, of course, I continue to study languages.
You do, and I wanted to ask you about that, too. How many languages have you studied thus far?
How many have I studied?
Or, well, I don't know how to phrase it. How many do you, I don't want to say how many languages do you speak, because I don't know what the threshold is for being fluent.
Yeah, that's a difficult question. I would say I'm conversational in Spanish and Portuguese.
Okay.
I can understand some basic French, probably German and Italian.
Uh-huh.
There are other languages that I've studied and couldn't even write anymore.
Sure.
Like Mandarin.
Mandarin. I know you were studying Arabic at one point. I remember that.
Some Arabic.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So why? And I don't mean that to sound judgmental. Why? What do you get? I know you're getting something out of this. What is that? I'm curious.
Well, part of it is I'm just a nerd. Let's be upfront about it.
I got some computer games I can introduce you to.
I know that's inconceivable.
Yeah.
So part of it is I like learning just the languages. It builds connection between people. Mm-hmm. So when you can say, when you greet one of my friends from Morocco introduced me to his father, and I knew enough Arabic to say hi to his father. It's nice to meet you, and to say that in Arabic, and his father was surprised that I cared enough to learn. Yeah. Beyond hello, but to say nice to meet you, God bless you, whatever in Arabic. So I do it for that, and also because some of the courses I teach are about psychology of language. When you learn other languages, you learn the ways that languages can change and how that might change the way we think about the world. Mm-hmm. When there are words or phrases in a language that just don't exist in English because they serve a function that is not as important to English speakers. Mm-hmm.
So idioms or something like that.
Yeah, like idioms. Sometimes it's even a particle. So in Korean, there's a particle that you put at the end of a sentence or a different one for a question.
Really? Okay.
That shows that you have a higher status than me.
Really?
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
So I would say, if I'm saying hello and your higher status, I have to say, how's it going? I say, 안녕하십니까. And that little sumnika simply means this is a question. And I'm asking the question of someone of a higher status.
I see.
So what happens is early in the conversation, we must determine, if it's not apparent, who has the higher status so that I can use the right word endings.
So it's not something, we're getting a little far afield here, but I'm fascinating. No, so it's not something like in German where you have a formal way of addressing versus an informal way when you're speaking, doing a direct address to someone else. You actually, because you just do that as a matter of politeness, typically. It's actually...
It's like something that you add at the end of the sentence. Yeah. It'd be like saying "sir" or something like that. Okay. But at the end of every single question, you might say that. Wow. So if you ever listen to someone speaking Korean, you might begin to hear often at the end of sentences, there's a little sound at the end of the sentence.
And it creates almost that sort of what we would almost call a sing-songy sort of pattern to it, to an extent?
No, not necessarily. It's just something that happens at the end of sentences, depending on the context of the sentence.
Gotcha.
Whereas, now certainly if you speak Spanish, you say tú and usted, and you have to know when to use which one, and you know that changes from country to country, even with some subtle differences. There are these rules. So yeah, I can say sir or ma'am in English, and I can use, would you please pass the salt? Instead of, hey, give me the salt. Yeah. So we realize we have these different registers in English as well, but the very fact that you have word endings in certain countries to indicate this, for me, it's just interesting. It's like a puzzle. I like puzzles. Yeah. But I like language puzzles more than anything.
Okay, so one final thing as we're running a little long on time here. I did want to go back to something you mentioned earlier about mentorship or being a mentor. I find people are daunted by that word because they realize that it is a big responsibility. Right. Or on the other hand, well, of course I can be a mentor.
Yeah, a lot of my mentorship with students, of course, occurs through graduate studies. So I have a lot of graduate students, and it's really something that someone said early on in my career in 1994. One of my students finished up his whole thesis, and he wanted to turn it into a journal article. So I always tell the student, hey, that's up to you. I'll work with you if you want to. So he did some work, and then I wanted to do those corrections like you mentioned early on about all my corrections in your paper. I said, but let me sit down with you and walk you through my mental process as I'm reading this and why I would change the wording here. And later he said, we worked together for 2 years, and I learned the most from that sit-down session where we wrote together. So as much as possible, at the Students Initiative, I try to get my graduate students to conference. I try to get my undergraduate students to take their stuff to the undergraduate research symposium. But even then, especially in my theory and research class, I tell the students, there's like 13 groups. It's a big class. And I said, unfortunately for me, this is like 13 independent studies. And you can come to my office as much as you want. We can shoot the breeze and talk about your ideas. We can talk about how to make a good review of literature. We can talk about how to ask questions if you're doing an interview study and how to facilitate that. So I said, really, I will give you as much guidance as you want. In many classes, sometimes that means I meet with each group several times throughout the semester. But I tell them I want this to be a formative process where I'm not merely grading the end project, but I want to work with you through the types of decisions you would need to make to do a good research project, or good research in an organization. What sorts of things do you need to ask? And I just think students learn more from you walking alongside with them than simply grading the project at the end.
And I think there's an interesting relationship between being a mentor and facilitating a class the way we've been talking about today. That when you're building that community of learners, you're not the star of the show. You are the facilitator.
Yes.
You're the guide on the journey, to
Right.
use that phrase. It's kind of the same thing when you're a mentor. You're no longer the hero, right? You are the mentor.
Yeah.
In that regard. So what do you have coming up next? I know you said we've talked a lot about Panama. You are doing some things yet this semester with the Office of International Studies and Programs. Is that right?
Actually, I am working with Office of International Studies and Programs a lot. I am on the International Studies Advisory Council, which is people from all over the campus, one person from each college is on this council to discuss issues pertinent to international studies. And then we've been meeting with people from AMALI, which is the Asian, Latin America, Middle East, Africa, and indigenous peoples. Basically, it's what we would call global studies, though it's really focused on the non-Western world.
Right.
And we've been meeting together to try to find out some what we would call global learning objectives that could apply equally to AMALI courses or to international studies courses.
Okay.
And then actually the other interesting news is I've never been to Africa, and my wife and I are going, actually right before graduation, we're going to Africa, where my wife is going to be doing some training on trauma and talking to some people who deal with a lot of trauma in the community, and I'm going to learn. I'm going to tag along and learn about African culture, at least one African culture.
Yeah.
And then we'll come back just in time to go to Panama.
There you go. And while you're in Africa, you're not just you're learning, but you're also teaching, right?
I'm teaching online. Yeah, I'll actually be teaching my students here from Africa, and I hope if there's enough internet connection in the small city that I'm in, I hope to be sending podcasts from this Veld or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. That sounds exciting. John, thank you so much for coming on the show.
All right, it's nice to be here.
And that's all the time we have for this week's episode of Let's Talk Teaching. You can find out more about what we talked about on our website at ctlt.illinoisstate.edu. Click on the podcast link in the upper right of the page. You can also find information on how to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. For Dr. John Baldwin, for all of my colleagues here at CTLT, until we talk again, happy teaching.